think this season we should try and avoid that joke at all costs. Be really out of our realm. We've made it too many times. We should still talk about Final Fantasy
2, known as Final Fantasy 2 in Japan. Oh, damn, I already did it.
Shit. You know what we haven't done in a while?
Huh.
What?
Talked about Final Fantasy.
You know what? This is patently not true. I think the last time we were in a room together, we talked about Final Fantasy, which is like a week or two ago.
I haven't done in a while. Talked about Final Fantasy. Also probably untrue.
You know, we just haven't talked about it in a recorded environment so that people can hear for enjoyment.
True.
Yeah, and our own personal gain.
I'm checking here on Zencaster to see if you guys have done your homework, and it looks like Alex is still showing as Pulse Alex, and Curtis is showing as Kirster's Tower. I think it's.
I haven't changed my name.
That's okay. Your name's the best because it's about Booster's Tower.
Yeah, that's fair. So, Super Mario RPG.
I guess we should stop alienated potential new listeners. I know there's a whole lot of dedicated Final Fantasy II heads who might be tuning in as this being their first season, in which case I will say, holy shit, really? That doesn't sound correct, but hello.
Yeah, you like FF2? No, I'm just kidding.
We are the Every FNFF podcast. If you're just joining us for the first time with this new season, this season we're going to be covering Final Fantasy II. And I don't think there's going to be many new listeners, but who knows?
We'll see.
We're always surprised. Every season there's like a whole new demographic unlocked.
We need to find the shade amp of
I was going to
say! Just like the absolute mastermind of everything that goes into it so they can make us look good.
That's right.
So the sequel to Ridley Scott's Final Fantasy, we were playing this season, Final Fantasies.
Yeah, Final Fantasies. I think my recording is actually Final Fantasy 2 Fast 2 Furious.
Okay.
So I too am hitting that well.
European gigolo.
If Final Fantasy was so good, why is there no Final Fantasy 2?
There actually is, and it's called Final Fantasy 2 Scholar of the First Sin. They kind of changed some enemy placements and stuff like that, so...
Speaking of...
We're hitting... Okay, so for the listener, we are hitting all of the notes here. It's like, okay, we're 5 minutes into the new season. We've already talked about Final Fantasy VIII. We've already talked about Dark Souls. We've already made the 2-4 joke. It's fine.
Yeah.
This is the New Testament of Final Fantasies.
So speaking of games with silly subtitles like that, like a Scholar of the First Sin, did y'all see that FF2 almost did get localized into English back in 1988?
I did not see that. No, I'd be very interested to hear more about that.
There's an actual ad for it too. That because people assumed it was going to come out, so there was an ad pulled out for it, and it was called Final Fantasy II: Darkness over Palamacia.
That's pretty fucking sick.
Yeah, right. It's pretty cool. It almost did, but obviously it never came out. It is the Final Fantasy with the second longest localization time. It didn't actually come over here, I think, until the PlayStation 1 version.
That is correct. I have that in my notes as well, which I think was 2003.
Yeah, so what's that?
Not quite
20
as long,
years?
Not quite as long as Super Mario RPG, not making it to Europe until like the Wii U, but still pretty long.
Yeah, 15 years, is that right? Something like that, yeah. The only other... The longest one, obviously, was Final Fantasy III, the very next one. So the two earliest ones besides Final Fantasy 1 took the longest amount of time to actually get here, which I think is kind of neat.
But I think we'll hit on kind of a lot of stuff around kind of the development. For today's episode, I think we're mainly going to talk about like the development and some other like mechanic stuff, and then kind of get into the story. But I would say I am in no ways an expert on the development of Final Fantasy II, but I did read a good portion of Fight Magic Items by Aiden, previous guest, which has a much more in-depth discussion of it, and I will be regurgitating Aiden's hard research into the ears of everyone and probably getting things wrong and talking about it incorrectly.
I can't wait to fill my ear cavities with your regurgitation. I'm very excited for it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the other thing that like kind of just tickles me about the fact that it wasn't localized for so long is that Final Fantasy 2 and 3 were made in America.
Yeah,
like they're
baby.
American-made video games, which I think is very weird. And I feel like that's like one of the last secrets that people like to share about Final Fantasy games. Like, it's one that like blew my mind decades into being a fan of the series. When I read that, I was like, what? They were made in California? That's crazy.
I think it's also kind of important to bring up. I didn't look too deeply into the discourse about it, because I try and not look too deeply into discourse on Twitter anytime. But a couple of weeks ago or a couple months ago or whatever, it doesn't matter. Time is stupid. There were people saying that JRPG is actually kind of like a pejorative, or it used to be. So like, I think we've always described these games as that, and I've never had that association with it.
Yeah. So the director of the upcoming Final Fantasy 16, it basically comes from Final Fantasy 16, is why like this kind of I don't want to call it discourse. Calling it the discourse is silly, but the reason people are talking about it is he was like, yeah, it feels like it puts me in a different category. They're like, I can't compete with other RPGs because we are a JRPG, so we're like sequestered off in our own little area. And like, maybe instead of seeing my game as a JRPG just because we're making it in Japan, maybe it's just an RPG, right?
Yeah,
and then it should be which I do understand that. And I feel like there's two kind of camps in it, where like I feel like when I say a JRPG, I mean a good one. A good RPG.
Yeah, it wasn't made in America, so therefore it is good.
Right. Which, like, I mean, games like I think like Chained Echoes obviously was not made in Japan, but I would consider it like a JRPG style or whatever. So, yeah. But there's different topics.
I think I also saw a lot of.
It's a philosophy more than like a objective. Kind of like these are the list of things that you need to.
I think it means whatever you want it to mean.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's just like they're evoking a certain thing, which, like, of course, in Fight Magic items evokes like the beginning of like turn-based, maybe kind of mythological combined with.
Yeah.
And
you know what? I can link this back into FF2 once we're good. Sorry, go ahead and do your thing. But I got a hell of a segue for this. This is gonna be great.
Nice. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I also saw people talking about how like they were like, like in the trenches of like the early days of like the localization of RPGs to America, which is something that we're definitely going to have to talk about with Final Fantasy II. We've already kind of touched on it a little bit with how it wasn't localized for a very long time and like the reasons behind that. But I think it was also like, I saw I forget what game it was, but someone posted like an X-Play review for the old heads listening who remember X-Play with Morgan Webb and Adam Sessler, I think his name was, who I think are both pretty cool people, but they were very critical of like an RPG that came out because it seems like it wasn't really their style. And like on G4 Tech TV or whatever it was, that was kind of like the comedy of it was like, oh, we're really brash and irreverent. We talk shit on video games and Dragon Ball Z sucks and stuff. So I think kind of, I guess, depending on when you first started hearing JRPGs being talked about, or if you were a fan and others weren't, it kind of plays into like, okay, well, is someone using JRPG pejoratively to be like, oh, well, I like, what used to be thought of as American kind of games, like platformers or Mega Man kind of action games, things like that, versus like an RPG, which kind of took a little while to really spread across the US to what it is now, which is just like, yeah, it's just an RPG. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it just kind of maybe, it's like, a lot of what I kind of call why JRPGs are separate than RPGs is like the same reason why like, it's just like a different style of storytelling, maybe.
Yeah,
but like that, it's just it's more of a vibe thing.
Yeah, it's all about vibes, and to me, I always thought like, oh, that means it is good, because it was developed in Japan, or in the case of Final Fantasy II, it was a Japanese development team that was programmed by an Iranian American man who had his work visa expire, so he had to go back to I think Sacramento, and then the rest of the development team followed him there, and they created Final Fantasy II in the USA, which is why everyone hates it and it sucks, is because it's not really a JRPG.
It's funny.
That was you're speaking of Nasser.
Nasir Gabelli.
Nasir, yeah.
He's developed tons of stuff. He's one of those guys who like they just called in for like the first Final Fantasy because he was like this one guy can just do anything. He's a muscle team. He won't stop working. He's so fast.
There's an interview with Sakaguchi where he's talking about Nazir Gabelli, and he says in it, he's like, yeah, we wanted to get him because he was like a legend, and so when I met him for the first time, it was like meeting one of my heroes and being like, oh my gosh, you're the person who made all these games for like the Apple II and stuff like that, like, because like
for serious,
yeah, because like you could still get a like there were Japanese PCs, right, that would run various ports of games made for the English speaking world. And so at the time, that was like if you owned if you owned a computer, or in Sakaguchi's case, he worked at an internet cafe, or not like a computer cafe, which is I think what Square was like at the time. Like that was the division he was working with. All these games that were made for it that were really good, they were all programmed by him. And so he was just like, oh my God, we're gonna make a game. We got to get this guy who makes all of my favorite games.
It also goes to show like why they are able to crank out a sequel in I mean, it's just, it goes to show like just how much the like technology has changed, but like they made this game in less than a year.
Well, okay, so that's what I wanted to bring up next too, is that if you are doing a like quick cursory search of Wikipedia for Final Fantasy 2 and 3, you'll see the exact same line copy paste with the same reference for Final Fantasy 2 and 3, where it says, oh, Nazir lost his visa, so he had to move to Sacramento, so they had to finish the game there. And I was like,
everyone else moved over there.
Yeah, and I was like, is this story true or is it apocryphal? Because it appears for two different games exactly the same. Maybe somebody just copy pasted it into one, or there's some misinformation about it. So I went looking for those interviews, and thanks to the Internet Archive, like those interviews still exist in their magazine form. And Sakaguchi says in those interviews, he's like, yeah, we did FF2 and 3 at the same time. Like we're making both of them. And so, yeah, we went to Sacramento and built the games there.
There's been a trend in on Twitch with like Elden Ring challenge runs where it's like, I played two games at the same time, one with a dance pad and one with a controller. I used one hand on each controller and beat two games simultaneously and stuff. And it's like, I imagine that's just how Nasir was like coding Final Fantasy 2 and 3.
Yeah, he's got like a like
he's got
a
two
computer
Apple
slightly
IIs.
to his left and one slightly to his right, and he's typing on both keyboards with both hands.
Yeah, while I was researching this as well, I also saw that Sakaguchi, before he became the Sakaguchi that we all know and love,
the Gooch,
as he liked to be called. I think.
I'll talk about it. Give me a second.
You'll talk about the Gooch. Okay. He really wanted an Apple II computer, but he couldn't afford it. So he bought like a cheaper but still extremely expensive computer at the time that was kind of like a knockoff Apple II, and that's kind of what he got his start with.
No, that's cool.
Scrappy
yeah.
folks.
Oh, and to just, this was mentioned real quick, so I just want to throw it in there. The parent company that like owned the division of that would become Square and eventually Square during the development of this game actually became their own like LTD, or what is that, limited or whatever. I don't know what that stands for. I'm not a business fucking guy. I'm not a business scientist.
I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman.
It was an electric power conglomerate called Denyu Sha, and it was just like a subsidiary of it was Square, and they were trying to break into this like burgeoning video game
computer entertainment.
And that's cool. Kind of with Final Fantasy being so successful, Square was able to kind of break off and do its own thing, starting with the development of Final Fantasy 2, which is really cool.
FF1 was successful. That was like a neat thing that I was reading about or whatever. It was a really good game for them. Like,
it was one of those things that was like, Square was like trying to prove themselves. Like from what I heard through, especially Aiden's book, is like they do seem like just a bunch of scrappy nerds who were just kind of like, okay, there's one guy who's really into prog music, this other person who's just like loves weird big stories and stuff like that.
There's this other guy who's also extremely into prog music.
Yeah, well, that was
they were just a bunch of like engineers or whatever, or basically it just felt almost like
I think they're all like college students for the most part. And, just I know Sakaguchi, I think we had mentioned this on a previous episode, but he really wanted to be a musician. So he was kind of I'll work at this like little startup company, Square or whatever, and kind of crank out a couple games. Like I like playing games on my Apple II or whatever computer he had. We'll try and make things and just, break into that market on the Famicom. And just once I start making money, then I can pursue my dreams of being a rock star. And then it's
my real goal.
I knocked it out of the park with one of like the last games that I was planning on making, and I think he was actually going to step away from Square and video game making if Final Fantasy didn't sell like a certain amount of copies, and then it exceeded that.
I think it was
400,000
was like the threshold. Like if we can sell more than
400,000,
then we can afford to like keep making games.
Yeah, something.
And it broke more than 500,000 just in Japan before it even reached America.
Incredible. Yeah, made a great game. But yeah, it's funny that a lot of that data about Sakaguchi comes from, because I went to look into, once again, shout out to the Internet Archive for having copies of these things. But it comes from the Electronic Gaming Magazine issue 232 interview with Sakaguchi, where the interview is titled "A Day with the Gooch," which
butt rock guitar riff. We're here with the Gooch.
But yeah, there is a PDF online available of that if you want to go read that. It's actually very interesting. They also do interviews with Uematsu and Amano and other people as well. A small side note, in that interview with Uematsu, they ask him, they say, what would be your ideal project? Like, what's like the thing you want to do the best? And he was like, I don't know, just work on one with my best friends. That's all I want to do. And I was like,
yeah,
love that, man.
his mouth to God's ears and straight into my heart.
But the way I wanted to tie this into what we were talking about earlier about JRPGs, right, is that the cover story for EGM 232 is all about Japanese video games. That was the not the plot, what would you call it? The topic of that issue. Like that was like the main thing they were showing off. And
we're talking about Bayonetta.
In the table of contents, the cover story is called Turning Japanese. And I went,
oh boy. Yeah, things that age well.
But to be honest, I mean, to be entirely fair to EGM, everything was written with a lot of, well, no, not that, but like everything was written with a lot of reverence for Japanese games. Like it was very like, yo, these are great. Like these are games that you don't know about and they kick ass.
And the other thing about that too is like, I don't know, like EGM at that point was a well-established thing. And who knows like the process of getting something published like that. So it could have been that the person who brought this story to them and was like, I want to tell this story. I have this, this piece that I want to write, pour their heart and soul into it, want it to be very reverent. And then like some asshole, like boomer editor is like sitting at the top and he's like, okay, so here's the tagline for this. This will help sell and stuff. And just like, that song's a hit. So let's go with that.
Well, so at the time, I mean, I was gonna say at the time, but that's not true at all. Because
like this issue's from 2008.
Yeah. But that's the thing. I was gonna say, well, even though it's only, to us like 15 years old, that's an entire lifetime of people who are currently enjoying Final Fantasy games, right? Like, there are people who are playing these games who aren't even born at the time. So to them, it's a lifetime away. But I was gonna say, to some extent, at the time, media coverage of Japanese media was often less than charitable, but it still happens. Like if we remember when Elden Ring came out, there were tons of developers and internet versions of magazines, I suppose, talking about how like Elden Ring is quote unquote too Japanese.
Damn, I missed that completely.
That's that was the whole thing, because like a lot of developers were like, they felt that their game was passed over for Elden Ring, and then so when they would try to defend themselves, they would say, well, it's too Japanese, it's too weird. And that was a big thing, especially in like 2008 and earlier, is that any Japanese media was just like quote unquote too weird. And there was a lot of like derision from Western publishers and Western magazines when they talked about Japanese games, where they were like, oh, those crazy Japanese, look what they're making. They're making these crazy things. And like it was often very pejorative. Yeah.
That permeated pretty much all of culture. I mean, even just look at Pokemon and like the South Park episode of Pokemon, like people today who didn't grow up in the era of like Pokemon being new might watch that and be like, this is a weird episode and it's like kind of racist, but like, whatever. Like it, and it's like, no, that's literally like, I remember being worried that I would have like Pokemon taken away from me or something, because it's
like the satanic panic wrapped in xenophobia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a perfect way to describe it. Because I remember being like, I might not be allowed to watch Pokemon because I'm hearing stuff on the news that says they're using subliminal messages to control my mind into liking the show. Because the only way that these kids could like such a weird and out there and Japanese show is that our former enemies from World War II are brainwashing them into thinking Goku is cool. Like that was like literally how I grew up, and it's laughable now to look back on, but that was a very real thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which also kind of ties into like the localization problems of breaking into the American market with Final Fantasy games and RPGs in general, and just kind of the trajectory of the genre going from like Western games for the computer that were then inspiring these RPG like Dungeons and Dragons and computer games that were inspired by that, inspiring these systems of these Japanese game developers who brought a different spin on it, which is widely popular, but people in the West were at first very hesitant to embrace it.
And I think where the what is the FF Yoshi P, that's what everybody calls him, the guy directing Final Fantasy 16. Oh, what is his name? It's killing me.
Naoki Yoshida.
Naoki Yoshida, yeah. I think where he's coming from is that, again, and like people still say this, like this happened with Elden Ring real big time, where people felt like it was unfair that they won awards, which that's like the best game ever made. So whatever.
Yeah, seriously. They're like, look at my UI versus Elden Ring's UI. Like, I remember UI designers
that was
freaking the fuck out.
Right.
I was like, yeah, your UI
that
fucking
was
sucks.
part
like,
of it.
Ubisoft was like, oh my god, I spent my life working on this UI, and Elden Ring just simplified it and made it good.
And that's the thing, is that they boiled it down to not like two companies. It wasn't just like, oh, they went this direction, we go this direction. It ended up being like, oh, they did that because they are Japanese. That was like the way it was framed. Yeah. And it was a wild thing to see in like 2022, but it just kind of like lets you know that division is still there to some extent. And that's where I think Yoshida is coming from and saying like, hey, just because my game is Japanese does not mean it's developed that way. Like, we're making just a game. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And like people anywhere can enjoy it.
It's so wild that that's still a thing that is happening, because it's like the entire gaming industry is just, everything is kind of building off of one another. Everything is kind of growing, at different rates and different companies and whatever. But it's like, you play a good game and you're like, that inspired me. Like Final Fantasy was inspired by Western games and, developing, and vice versa. And it's like, the distinction is something that isn't necessarily needed anymore, but it is still very much a thing that exists in a lot of the world.
Sure. It's been going on even through cinema and everything, like the Western and samurai, films have been just kind of trading and taking inspiration from each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Since media was a thing, and even Disney, as we know, is inspired by there's a whole like weird circuit like where people bringing comics back from like the war.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's a very weird circle where like the illustrator of Astro Boy was very inspired by Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah.
So like it all comes back around. Like everybody's borrowing from each other. But I would say just two quick recommendations for people. If people want to learn more about this, because this topic could go on forever. We have a podcast about FF2, but this topic could go on forever. So if you want, check out, I got two YouTube recommendations for you. There is a YouTube video called A Look Inside the War on Pokemon by Hazel. That's really, really good. about the like Pokemon Satanic Panic. And if you're down for 6 hours of video, the Tokimeki Memorial review by Action Button is really good. There's an entire section in there about Japanese othering and like how video games aren't given a chance sometimes because of their origin. But
yeah. And I think as an aging weeb, I find it very comforting that all of the things that I loved as a kid and got made fun of pretty hardcore in grade school, like any kind of Japanese stuff was, oh, that stuff's so weird. Oh, this is so dumb. Like, I remember years and years ago seeing someone in the NFL, I forget what player or team it was, but had like a Goku like visor on his helmet or something, like a Dragon Ball Z visor.
Sure,
and I was like, the fucking kids who used to play flag football in like 4th grade were making fun of me because I watched Dragon Ball Z. And now these like world-class athletes are like super into it. And that makes me so happy to see that like there's not as much of a stigma at like the ground level, I guess, but there still very much is that stigma, in unexpected places, I guess.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought these guys who love watching other people play a game?
Yeah, getting into Final Fantasy 2 has been kind of a neat trip. I don't want to say down memory lane because I was 1 year old when this game was made, so it's not really in my memory.
You were in memory land.
But it's neat to like sample the atmosphere of the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about this a lot, especially during the Final Fantasy 1 season, of just like time and place. And sure, it's easy to look back at it now and be like, oh, this game is kind of janky, and some things in it don't work, and it like you can't fucking compare like games developed at this time, even if it's like a remake or like remaster or whatever, like in Final Fantasy Origins or something. You can't really compare it in the same breath that you're comparing like Elden Ring, like the newest game that came out, and being like, well, Elden Ring does this system a lot better. So I think there are surprisingly people who will do that. And I always like kind of coming at these from a critical standpoint, but kind of thinking of it in terms of like, for me, the way, like, we'll get into kind of the specifics of how Final Fantasy 2 differs from Final Fantasy 1, which is a substantial amount.
Yeah, this is a different game.
Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's really cool to me to see that, especially at the time where, like, going from Zelda 1 to Zelda 2, like, I hated Zelda 2 as a kid because I wanted more Zelda 1, and I also probably had played some other Zelda games that had come out since then, so the fact that it was so vastly different and they tried a different thing, I hated. But now it's like we live in a world where just everything is fucking remastered or remade, or things, it just constant rebooting of things, and it's like, oh yeah, I just want more of the same. So the fact that these very young video game developers were like, okay, we're gonna make a new game and we're gonna completely fucking change it, like everything about it, like it's gonna be completely different, and we're just gonna go for it. And that was very much like, I think, under Sakaguchi's direction. He really wanted to do that versus like Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior or whatever you want to call it. The philosophy for Dragon Quest was more like, we're going to make like some marginal changes here and there for each sequel. Like it's going to still be the same. And the philosophy of that was, we don't want to alienate new players. Whereas with like Sakaguchi, he was like, no, we're fucking going from the ground up. Like let's do it. Let's change it up.
Yeah. So this game, speaking of like the people who worked on it, right? It has kind of like at the time, not so much, but today, a very who's who of people who were working on it, right? Because Sakaguchi did return to be the project lead, but he didn't write the scenario. He didn't design the game mechanics, right? And so I was going to say, starting with the person who wrote the story, Kenji Terada. Mm-hmm. Kenji Terada has, like, if you look at his wiki or any of his credits online of what he's worked on, he has some games. He's worked on some games, right? And like, that's infinitely more games than I've worked on, and they're all pretty good. But then below it, screenwriting. This dude has written so many movies and anime series. Whoa. It's crazy. So like, he wrote like a movie for Kimagure Orange Road. He wrote like just all kinds of stuff. It's crazy how much he's written. Robotech movie. He wrote one of those. He wrote a Devilman OVA. Like, so guy has his he definitely
Ogre Slayer
can do things. Did he do a Slayer?
Ogre Slayer.
Ogre Slayer. Okay, I was like Slayers. Holy shit. Okay.
He wrote songs for Slayer. Holy shit.
He also directed some animes too, so he's done a lot, right?
I think it's funny to think of game development cycles now, like how long was 13 in development and how many changes happened and how many people were doing it and everything. But it's so interesting, like looking back on these, because the development of Final Fantasy II kind of happened around the same time that other RPGs were coming out, like Phantasy Star, and Phantasy Star kind of was a complete change in the genre in that it was focusing mainly on characters. It was more so story driven and stuff like that. So rather than it being like more about the mechanics and structuring the story around the gameplay, Sakaguchi kind of wanted to take that approach and focus more on having there be more story and then building the world around that, which I think it has just become, the way to do it. But at the time, this was completely innovative and completely new.
Yeah, because the first one was very much like, well, let's do a D&D game.
Yeah, it's like, a D&D campaign, and we'll just have...
Who's your party? We'll make it up. And then like this pretty like color by numbers kind of thing, where you're just kind of going from town to town, get the next plot point.
And in this one, there's a lot of mechanics that were like put in with that in mind. First in the series to have named characters as your main party.
That's true.
They added a thing that's I think it's called Ask, where you can ask a character, certain characters, certain things, and they'll give you a keyword. Yeah, they'll give you a keyword, and then that kind of becomes almost like functionally like an item that you have in your inventory that you can then use.
I love that. To
have conversations and build the plot along that way. And again, now you look at it and you're like, that's kind of clunky and stuff, but like on the NES or on the Famicom, like that's fucking awesome.
It kind of reminded me of King's Quest, but in like a text form, where like you try using this item in this spot and like instead, like, oh, I don't know anything about that.
You can use items on people, which is cool.
I think it's more so me just being extremely Dark Souls pilled and like loving the quest progression in that and how that tells a story, and being like, oh, this is kind of like how it works in Dark Souls, which very well could have been inspired by this in some manner, because one of the biggest game franchises.
Dark Souls is an RPG.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Dark Souls is an RPG.
Action RPG.
So, speaking of the mechanics and the systems that go into it, this game had 3 different designers, right? It had 3 lead designers, I should say. That's Hiromichi Tanaka, Akitoshi Kawazu, and Koichi Ishii, who all 3 are also like these like heavyweights who, like, again, at the time, not heavyweights.
No, but Kawazu of fame for Final Fantasy Legends, which definitely started as a Final Fantasy game.
The Saga games? Yeah, dude. Kawazu, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so Kawazu...
What was it in the chat? I accidentally called him Sagaguchi.
Sagaguchi, yes, yeah. That's so good.
But yeah, so with Saga, like he was developing the Saga games, and then when it was localized, he wanted to bring an RPG to a Game Boy after kind of seeing how great and successful Tetris was. He was like, gotta bring an RPG to that, and that's what became the Saga game. And then when localizing it, this weird kind of inversion sort of happened, where now it was easier to localize something by attaching the Final Fantasy name.
Yep.
So it's not really a Final Fantasy game, but it kind of is, and just really, really interesting. Like I find this stuff fascinating, and I love studying the history of it all.
Final Fantasy II in Japan is actually called Doki Doki Panic.
Koichi Ishii, who's worked he's a producer for Luigi's Mansion. That's cool.
Hell yeah.
He also went off to make Ishii went off to make the Mana series. So like Legend of Mana,
Secrets of Mana.
Secrets of Mana. So
Mario Hoops 3-on-3.
And Mario Hoops 3-on-3. That's
why they put a cactuar in there or whatever, right?
And Tanaka went on to do battle design and produce Xenogears and the Chrono Cross and other thing, as well as Final Fantasy 11. So
yeah, and just really, really fascinating. Like I think my favorite part about doing this podcast has been learning all this stuff and finding more interest in it. Whereas I think when we started, I was kind of just like, I'm gonna play the game and I'm gonna talk about the game. Like I remember listening to the Those Who Fight podcast and being like, oh shit, they're talking about like developers and stuff like that. And now I just feel really dumb because I'm just like, Tifa can use the Power Soul to get really good damage. Like, but the growth that I've personally had of being like, no, I actually want to know more about about like the time and place of when these were developed, and
we'll do a victory lap of the old seasons someday.
Yeah, we'll do the remake season, the rebirth, the FF7 season. That's what we're doing next season. Everyone's like, they're finally going to do 8. We're like, we're doing Final Fantasy 7 again and correcting everything that we got wrong.
Our FF7 remake season is not about the FF7 remake. It's a remake of our FF7 season. But yeah, so like this game definitely had like a who's who of people on it. Like, and it makes sense, right? Their first one was successful. So they bring in a lot of other like
Nobuo
talent.
is on the soundtrack, of course.
Of course. Speaking of which, Nobuo Uematsu, as soon as you turn the game on, not that like we need to get into the game right now, but as soon as you start the game, the battle music that starts up, I like pointed at it. I did the like Leonardo DiCaprio meme point, and I was like, "That's the Final Fantasy 14 battle music." Oh my gosh! Oh shit! That's that one. How did they steal it from a game that came 20 years later? 30 years later? Anyway,
yeah.
This game's old at this point is what I'm saying. I'm old at this point is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
I stopped counting in the 90s.
But yeah, that's I'm sure we'll get into more of the development as we go, but that's probably about all I wanted to say about the actual development and the hilarious interviews that I read in EGM.
Yeah. I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure we'll have more tidbits that we come across throughout this season, but I think that's a pretty good primer on this game that everyone agrees is fantastic, and all of the wild changes that they decided to make were universally embraced and loved by everyone who's played it.
It's a bummer that this game didn't get localized until later, because I was
such a bummer.
Usually I would like do research to like, I wonder if there's like any like old like interviews in English, like with the developer. Maybe I could find some in Japanese, like really early, like press about this game.
Yeah, no, I'm also interested at the time. I didn't actually look anything up about this, but how was it like received? Because this game is, like
it was received well.
Very different. This I think people have made the claim that this might be the most important Final Fantasy game, and in that not only like obviously the first one is very important for establishing the series, but this one kind of is like the drop in the ocean that creates the ripple effect that would become many things, like the Final Fantasy Legend games. Not even just Final Fantasy, but like every game basically that was inspired by Final Fantasy. Like Kawazu wanted to make, like when making a Game Boy RPG, wanted it to be like Final Fantasy 2.
a GRPG, if you will.
Yeah, a GB RPG.
That's right. I actually, it's funny that you said that, because I was thinking about, if I leave the podcast episode out, I might say about FF2 is the first Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious thesis statement.
Yeah, and that might sound wild, but like a lot of the DNA that was put in this game, and again, they were kind of going from the ground up and trying something new, would then evolve into like the systems that we really know and really love and care about.
Every Final Fantasy 3 and onward is a sequel to Final Fantasy 2 in a way that they're not necessarily a sequel to Final Fantasy 1, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I feel like with every media, whether it's like a band's second album or a director's second film, is always like the one that kind of defines who they're gonna like, what they're gonna be like.
Yeah.
Because they just like, okay, I figured out how to do the thing. Now let me like really, now that I'm like comfortable in like this position, like that's what it feels like. Like, okay, Final Fantasy 2 is like when things start to feel like Final Fantasy.
Final Fantasy 2 is the toxicity album of Final Fantasy.
3 cheers for Sweet Revenge.
Hell yeah.
Speaking of reception, though, there's not like a ton of information about how the original one was received, but Famitsu is like the big place to go to see how Famicom games were received back in the 80s and 90s, and it gave it a 35 out of 40, which is pretty good for Famitsu.
Nice.
Like they didn't just hand out 40s.
Scale.
that is a weird scale, actually.
I thought Alex was going to be like, that's a very Japanese scale. Like
the other ports were not reviewed as favorably, but I think when you review the ports of FF2, you have to consider that like you're now living in a post FF2 world. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
4 has happened now. Like 4 is a lot of fun. You know what I mean? Like I think 7 has 7 has happened by now. But at the time of FF2, those hadn't happened. It is the most fun thing out there. Like, it is a blast.
Yeah, I want to play the Wonder Swan version.
Speaking of things on the Internet Archive, the manual for the Wonder Swan version is up there, so I did read through the manual.
I'm glad you brought up the manual, because I also wanted to see like an archive of the manual, and there is one for the Famicom. Obviously, it's all in Japanese, so to me, I couldn't really get too much out of it. But I also was like, okay, well, let me look at this from the lens of, an American player who would be playing it for the first time when it came out. So I looked up the Origins one, and nothing really jumped out at me too much. Like, this game has a very, very weird systems, and I was kind of wondering if like some of I would say they're probably like exploits of the system.
Sure.
If they were, mentioned in there as like, hey, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get into the mechanics of it. In my opinion, I think it plays just fine without those. Like, if you don't know the exploits and you just roll through, you'll be fine. Like, it's not gonna
exactly. That's the way that they developed it to be. And I guess should we just get into it kind of now instead of
was there something else I wanted to say about FF2? Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to say about FF2. Sure. About the development of it, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final Fantasy 2 is also a novel. Another interesting thing. So when they made Final Fantasy 2, they also released Final Fantasy 2 Muma no Meikyu, which is just a novelization of the game. It's not even like a side story like the FF13 ones. Like, it is just the story of FF2 in novel form.
I know what I'm going to read everyone this Christmas.
Well, sadly, there's no English translation for it yet, but there is a Tumblr.
Yeah, it came out in what, 88?
Yeah, 89,
Any day now, they're going to drop it, dude.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because there is a Tumblr called Final Fantasy 2 Translated, and they started translating this book, and they did not finish it.
Damn,
so you can get up to
though.
chapter 5 in English.
We need to have Corey beat them to the punch. Corey's not busy right now or anything.
What's interesting is that, like, I believe it's written by Terada, who wrote the plot.
Yeah, that actually would make sense, because I think he also wrote the dramatization of The Bouncer, or is that
really?
That's sick.
I'm thinking of someone else.
Okay.
Sorry, but it is someone else did like the dramatization, which I guess means that there was a novel of The Bouncer that I did.
Okay, our ultimate contribution to the world. We've already kind of, when I say we, I mean Alex basically has already made a lot of contributions to the Final Fantasy world, like the 13 script and various other things. But our contribution to this is to get a translation of that story and have Jason Alexander be the audiobook. We have everything we need. We just got to get Jason Alexander on board.
A little more reason to start a Patreon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fund our shitpost.
But this book, which in English is Final Fantasy II Labyrinth of Nightmare, which is a fucking baller title for it. Game should have been called that. But
yeah, that's real cool.
Because it was written alongside with Final Fantasy II, and it's by the same author, and it's just the novelization of the game, it depends on how you personally want to headcanon it. To me, I'm like, no, that's what happens in the game. And so, like, as we go through FF2, I'm going to combine my knowledge of what happens with Labyrinth of Nightmare and the video game Final Fantasy II to be like, this is a canonical whole. Like,
nice.
Even though we didn't see it in the video game, I can guarantee you this is what happened before we came into the room because the book said so.
These are the deep data logs of this season.
Yeah, these are the data logs of the season. Whenever you have a question about a character, you have to just look it up. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about releases. Actually, I did want to ask you all something before we get into mechanics as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What versions have you all been playing?
So I have been playing on Steam Deck the Pixel remaster. I've made it a good bit of the way in. I had said last season that I kind of want to do the Pixel remaster and maybe also the Famicom one. I still plan on doing that. I just need to get the Famicom one running on my Steam Deck.
The translated one, right?
The translated one, exactly. My main reason for that is I kind of just want to go through and play all of this on the Pixel remaster and not necessarily like, I think the downfall that I had when I was doing that with Final Fantasy IV was trying to stream all of it in one of the versions, and that is just way too much of a time investment in a small time window. So for this one, I'm just gonna try and play through both versions and kind of see differences as I get to it. And I can definitely start catching up on the Famicom one, and I think it'd be interesting because this game has a very interesting system that, like I alluded to, is very exploitable. So I don't imagine there being too many difficult fights that I can't just kind of level grind away while I'm sitting on my couch.
Sure.
I've also started the Pixel Remaster, but I also started the PSP version as well, which is a very different kind of pixel style. It has a very kind of high fidelity pixel art version.
Until the Pixel Remaster, that was kind of like the version I would see people playing was the PSP version. I think it's like the best
it's good.
one.
I mean, the art's gorgeous. The music is great, but I think the music in the Pixel Remaster is better because they did a proper recording of it, with live instruments.
I think the thing that I'm most excited for about playing the Famicom one is actually hearing the music as it was composed for a 2A03 chip versus the very beautiful orchestration of the Pixel Remaster. I also when we did Final Fantasy 1, I played that on my PS Vita with the Origins collection on there. So I could also, if I become a real sicko, if I become real Final Fantasy 2 pilled, maybe I'll be triple dipping and play 3 different versions. But
I might, because as I've been playing through this game, I've been like, oh, this game is so fucking good. And there's so much like history to it and like its development and stuff. Like, I might have to become an FF2 head for real.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a lot this game has to offer. But I've been playing the Famicom version. I've been playing a hack translation. The hack was done by Neo Demiforce, and the translation was done by Chaos Rush. In the README file for the translation, they call it Final Fantasy II Refurbished. If you look up Final Fantasy II translation in Google, it will be the first translation patch. So that's the one that I'm playing. It was not to like get too deep into it, but to translate an old video game is not as simple as just translating the Japanese to the English. You actually have to like change sprites and code and all kinds of stuff, because like pointers in the text are pointing to different spaces in memory. And so you actually have to do like memory mapping, coding to be able to have the game display the characters. So the only reason I'm bringing it up is that in the credits, and I want to give credit to the people who actually did the work, Neo Demiforce did the hack. So everything was like recoded, remapped. It can now play in English, and it works on our consoles, right? And then, but the translation wasn't ultra solid. It would get you there, but then there were like some times where maybe they didn't know exactly what the character in Japanese was saying, so they just put in their own joke. They just wrote whatever. So later,
a miserable pile of lies, right?
A miserable pile of lies. Later, I think it's 2018, Chaos Rush came in and fixed it up using the original translation plus knowledge about the GBA translation, because the GBA translation is pretty true to it, and then just completely retranslated from scratch anything that was different between the two. So it's a more like honest version of it. There's also, if you download that IPS file, which is a patch that you can apply, in the zip folder that I got from romhack.net, it includes B button mode. So you can patch it with B button mode instead, which just lets you run with the B button. So there's actually like a run button. It's very nice.
There is a run button in the Pixel Remaster also, which took me probably about an hour and a half of playing to realize.
Yeah, and you can move diagonally.
And a repeat button.
That's the crazy part.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't work. I was hoping I could sneak past some soldiers in one of the towns that are blocking like the inn and stuff. It doesn't work like that, but you can move diagonally.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the versions we're playing.
What are you playing it on, Curtis? I'm guessing just an emulator on your computer, or?
Yeah, I'm playing it on an emulator on my computer. Although,
I mean, the reason I ask is because I do have like EverDrives and stuff where you could potentially put that on there. But again, you talking about the development history of the ROM hack and the translation, that also might not even work on an EverDrive, because sometimes there has to be all kinds of like the amount of work that ROM hackers put in is so amazing, and it always blows my mind. And it's so cool.
I also have the original Famicom cartridge for Final Fantasy II.
Nice.
With
Look at
the
that.
manual inside.
But does it have a coupon in it?
You know what? I don't know that I've ever opened it, so let's see.
I don't think they were doing the coupon thing with Final Fantasy.
It looks like it's just the cart and the
Curtis is
manual.
pulling out, and there's a rat nest just in there.
So when the FBI listens to this and hears that Curtis is playing a hacked ROM, I can confirm as a witness that he does have the rights to do it because he has the physical copy of the game.
I actually thought about it. I was like,
FBI doesn't give a shit about Japanese versions of the
Yeah,
game.
true.
I was actually thinking about it. I was like, oh, I have a physical copy of Final Fantasy II for the Famicom. I should just like stream that for the season. Like that would be fun. Actually boot it up on hardware and be like, this is the real hardware I'm playing it on. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh, I'm not that good at reading Japanese. That would be, it would be so hard for the podcast because y'all would be like, oh, you know when this character says this? And I'd be like, no, I don't remember that. But I did see a bunch of characters I don't understand. So
You can do it for the speedrun.
that's right. But anyway, actually, you know what? The back of the box has the world map on it.
Oh, that's super cool. That I really like that style too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I wonder who the artist is because that doesn't look like Amino.
I don't know. Yeah, it does say on the back of the box. It says character design, Amino, but doesn't have.
Oh,
other
you
art.
Amino.
Anyway,
Yo,
Final
oh
Fantasy
my god,
II.
hell yeah! I'm looking at this this manual for the Origins on PlayStation, I guess. Maybe
Origins was a PlayStation or PlayStation version.
The reason I'm
Not to be
confused
with Stranger in
yeah,
Paradise.
the reason I'm confused about it is because I scrolled all the way to the bottom and there is an ad in the back of it that is just for PlayStation 2, Final Fantasy X-2. The adventure continues, winter 2003.
oh wow,
Hell yeah, dude.
I had a very very small detour. I had a magazine. I forget what magazine it was, but it was a like maybe it's PlayStation magazine or something like that. When I was younger, I had like a short subscription to it, and I remember not the ad, but the full multi-page article about Final Fantasy X-2 coming out, and having a picture of Yuna with the gun on
Moose with the fur.
the first page of it, and then just a full page that only had text and nothing else that just says "slap yourself for looking at Yuna's legs."
Wow, yeah, which was the style at the time.
Which was the style at the time. Yeah.
It's like my brother in Christ. You're the one who rendered Yuna's legs and put it on your magazine. Yeah, there's also an ad for the Brady Games guide with conquer 2 classic RPGs with 1 official strategy guide from Brady Games. Complete walkthroughs for both Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy II. Unstoppable boss strategy. All-inclusive bestiary area mass and detailed items.
Do you mean the Final Fantasy X-2 Brady Games guide that I have right here?
Yeah. Shout out to this podcast is brought to you by Brady Games.
The ad works.
It's the only ad reads we'll
start
ever
doing
do.
this in a visual medium so I can show everybody what I have.
Sponsor us, Brady Games.
Yeah, we should do fake commercials for game guides and shit. The only ad reads we'll ever do.
Yeah. We won't do ad reads unless you are a strategy guide company. if you're whatever Brady Games has become, hit us up.
Yeah, but should we dive into these chunky mechanics?
I think it is time to talk about actual Final Fantasy II. Yeah, mechanics and scenes and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Right after this break from our sponsor.
That's right. So I am to understand that every version of this game is a little bit different when you turn it on.
Yeah, it would
different
make
things are
sense.
gonna happen.
I think it's the same basic skeleton of how it works, which I think is a very divisive system. Imagine, if you will, you just finished Final Fantasy 1. You know, the one of the most important.
Is dead.
Chaos
the cycle has been destroyed.
You got used to your D&D style gameplay. You're leveling up. You're gaining experience points. You have the weird mana system of more D&D style where you have only so many charges until you rest. That kind of thing. Yeah, that's completely different in this game. Now it is there are no experience points, and you level up individual aspects of your character, things like HP or magic attack, that kind of stuff. Those all have their own way of being leveled up. And Curtis, do you want to speak on how you level these things up?
Well, they're all slightly different, but the idea is, in general, usage is what makes a stat go up. So if you lose HP, there's a chance that you will gain more max HP. If you attack with a sword, there's a chance post-battle that you will gain more proficiency with the sword.
It's like Morrowind.
And each version of the game handles the mathematics a little bit differently. The Famicom version is very about what I would call dice rolls. Obviously, in the circuitry,
just like
just like Morrowind. It's just picking a random number, right? It's just random number generating and then seeing if that's within a threshold. But the idea is that a small digression. There's a lot of math in this game.
My god, so much fucking math, dude.
There was a lot in FF1, but this game has systems on systems on systems. The calculations for attacking and defending and evading are much more complex than they were in FF1, and that plays into the way you build your stats as well.
Buckle in, everyone. This is Calculations Corner, where we are going to go line by line, every formula, how it all works.
Well, okay, so you know what?
You can look it up on like wiki pages and stuff like that to kind of see it. I don't think it really matters too much unless you're trying to like super max everything out. I think it's an interesting way of looking at this, and the way I've been the lens that I've been seeing it through is like Pokemon EV training, where the game was programmed to try and be like, well, how do we make sure that everyone's playthrough is different? How do we make sure that every Pokemon isn't just, like this number goes up when you hit this level or whatever? And the way they did that in Pokemon was certain Pokemon that you defeat have these effort values that will correspond to a certain stat. So that's why when I'm training my Meowth and you're training your Meowth and they start at the same level, their stats are all over the place. There's a lot of hidden things in there that cause it to be different. Final Fantasy II is kind of like that, but with every fucking stat, and there's different things that you can do to level it up, and there's dice rolls involved, and so basically I don't think they intended for this to be exploited. And when I say exploited, if your HP goes down, you have a chance to have higher maximum HP. So when players figured that out, they realized, oh, okay, well, I can just have this one goblin enemy and like have it just be stuck in a stalemate in this battle and not attack it and just punch the shit out of myself or my teammate the entire time. And then at the end of the battle, after doing that and healing a lot, all of my stats are going to go up for those specific things that I did.
Right.
Like,
just like Skyrim.
Now,
it's sneak increased.
Punching my horse.
So there are a couple ways in which the game can be broken that way. And I will say, having played FF2 now through twice and roughly normally, you don't need to break the game. The game will get you there. Like it'll break you.
It'll break you.
No.
It's designed and balanced in a way that does not expect you to really know that, I think, but it's
right.
It can become so obvious when you're playing it, or this game is just so infamous for the system that, of course, people are going to min-max in this specific way.
Yeah, that's okay. So that is part of it, I think, is that this game is obtuse in a way that it could frustrate people who like to min-max. I would say the first playthrough of FF2 that you do is best enjoyed not min-maxing and letting the game, letting the chips fall where they may, right? Like, let the game handle your stats. Don't worry about it too much. Just go to the next area.
Sakaguchi's capable hands. Put your trust in Nazir's capable hands. They're going to guide you through it.
No, the one caveat that I might give to that, maybe, again, it depends on how you feel about it, is I personally would set one character as a white mage, or give them white magic, give one character black magic, and then use it all the fucking time. Because the only way you're going to level up magic, just like every other stat in this game, is to use it. And I think that in most Final Fantasy games, for me, magic is for two things. It is for bosses, if I have magic that'll do a lot of damage to them, or it is for elemental enemies that don't take damage from normal attacks. Other than that, I don't really use magic in RPGs. I'll just attack is good enough for me, baby. It does the numbers, it's fine. In this game, you want to use that magic. Use it all the time. Like, because wherever you're going, there's going to be an inn at the next town always. So just throw that magic out there, because your MP is not going to increase. The power of your magic is not going to increase over time unless you do that. There is no Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3 in this game. There is just Fire, and it has 16 levels of proficiency. So you need
actually,
to
Curtis,
use it.
I do want to point out that in the Pixel Remaster, when you gain proficiency, it actually does call it Fire 2, etc.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. It's not
the MP,
Fire
the MP
Fira
usage.
idea.
Yeah, the MP usage, which again, this is the first game that the first Final Fantasy game that had MP.
What if this game gave you different names for every level? So it's like Fire, Fira, Firaga, Firaja, Farabla, Faraza. Yeah,
Firaga,
Firaga.
Yeah, but it's the way that I've noticed it, I think I've gained proficiency in like fire and thunder so far, and when you gain proficiency, it does more damage, and it also increases the amount of MP that you use when using that spell. So like proficiency 2, it takes 2. You eventually get a character that has pretty high proficiency spells. They're all like white mage spells, but it's like cure level 7 that takes 7 MP. That sort of thing.
Yes.
You mentioned inns and going to inns. Do you want to speak on how inns work? I haven't actually looked up the calculation of that, but I think I got a general idea of it, because they can kind of, it seems to me like the inns are like disaster capitalism, like at its finest, where they're just like, oh, you're at death's door, you have very little HP and very little MP. Yeah, that'll be 7,000 gil. Like, it hasn't been that exaggerated for me yet, but there's some times when, if you go to an inn and you're fully topped off, they're like, do you want to stay here for the night? It'll be 0 gil. You're looking good. You're well rested. Sleep in our bed for free. But if you're like crawling in, like just about to die, they're like, yeah, you're gonna have to pay a lot, buddy.
Yeah. So it's dependent on the amount of like actual HP and things that are being fixed. Yeah, the inns will adjust their pricing.
It's like the opposite of a Poke Center.
Well, I mean, like, we are living in a darker world in FF2. FF2 is
another thing, speaking of Poke Centers, is I was very disappointed to find out that inns do not recover dead or felled allies.
They do not.
Yeah, the sanctuaries, the churches, I forget what they were called in Final Fantasy 1, but they have made a return where you have to go there to recover your dead your fallen homies.
I would like to make a point about, at very least, the Famicom version of the churches where you can revive your homies in FF2. I don't remember about the Pixel Remaster. I have to go check. But when you walk into one of the sanctuaries, they are like 3 screens wide, and there is never anything inside of them except for a statue at the top. And I was like, what an odd choice to make the largest room in the entire game also the most empty one. And they put them in every town. And I'm always just like, what is all this space for? There's nothing here. There's no furniture. There's no people. There's nothing.
All right, you go into a church and ask them what all that space is for.
But they at least have like pews and stuff.
Why is the ceiling so high?
Yeah, but there's at least like ornamentation, right? Like, it's just a wide room with nothing in it.
It's not that big in the Pixel Remaster.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I have a screenshot of it in the Pixel Remaster.
It's smaller than the spell shop.
Okay, yeah,
it's smaller than Princess Hilda's throne room.
The outside of the sanctuaries in Famicom FF2 are normal building size. They're like the same as like a shop or whatever. And then when you go inside, like, you can walk a whole screen to the left and a whole screen to the right. And I'm just like, that's such a weird option. Such a weird thing to do. But yeah, suffice it to say, the mechanics in this game have some things going on with them. And I'm sure that like we'll get more into details of certain aspects as we go through the game and start leveling up and start getting more proficiency, because we'll see like an event will happen and we'll say, oh, why did this happen? Why is this not working for me? Etc., etc. And at those points, I'm sure we can like dive more into each individual mechanic instead of just sitting here and doing like a calculations corner, right? And like going through every single line of the code and just talking about how it works. So I am fine with that explanation of mechanics, unless you all have something else you want to say.
Yeah, no, I think I think, like you said, with the min-maxing, I can definitely see the trap. I can see my brain going burr with number go up. And at one point I was like, oh, well, this user, Jesus Christ, this playable character has the sap spell, and I can just use that on my entire party. And if I decrease my MP, then it's likely to increase the overall MP that I have versus just using spells and stuff. And I did that for a little while, and then I was like, you know what? For my first playthrough, I think I'm just gonna let the game take the reins, and I'm not gonna really focus in on that. Like, one of the first things I saw on the Steam community or something was like, here's how you can max out all of your stats with every character before you even meet Scott. And I'm like, well, if that's how you enjoy playing games, sure, that sounds, that might be fun, but it is very easy to kind of fall into like a really, really deep grind in this game that I don't think you really need to. Again, if that's how you enjoy it, then go for it. But I'm probably just gonna be like, maybe there'll be a point where I'm at a tough boss fight and I can just kind of use those strats to get an edge. But I think I'm just gonna try and play it as if the way that the developers, I imagine, intended it, which is just like, yeah, this is a good way to kind of keep it random and every play fresh with how it all works.
Right. I think that's the best idea. Again, it's whatever is most fun, but to me, doing 30-minute battles where I attack my own characters is not fun. Like, that's not exciting and thrilling to me.
It breaks the lore immersion as well. It's like, oh no, there's a zombie. I better beat the shit out of my homie for fucking 10 minutes. Bring him to death. It's like the Saiyan trope that they had in like the anime where it's like, oh, every time a Saiyan gets close to death and then gets revived, he gets exponentially stronger.
Yeah. But you know what is thrilling? If that's not thrilling, do you know what is thrilling? Is the little monologue that pops up when you turn the game on, at least for the Famicom version. I don't remember how I think the Pixel Remaster just takes you to the opening menu screen, but literally just on powering on the console, you get an opening text crawl. Like, like in Final Fantasy IV, when Cecil and Kain leave Baron, you get the big opening text crawl that shows like the castle in the background and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or when you cross the bridge in FF1, it just starts. You just get that now. Like the start screen has not come up. The load screen has not come up, but you get the opening text crawl about the game in Final Fantasy II for Famicom, which I think they moved to after you select a new game in the other versions.
I believe you are correct. Yeah.
There's like there's actually like kind of a cinematic, I think, in the later
There's
versions.
a cinematic in the Pixel Remaster. Very exciting.
Yeah.
And I think it started the PSP version of that too. I noticed too.
Okay.
It's this text. It's like a few screens of like vignettes of things. It's all pixel art, but you see these like vignettes of scenes happening. But there's like every sentence of the scroll has been plays over it.
Yeah, and we learn from the text crawl that we're kind of in medias res, right? Like the world has already been in motion before we come to it, and the main players here are the Empire of Palamecia, right?
Sounds familiar.
Which we learn whose emperor has, and depending on again the translation and the version that you're playing, some of the versions say out straight up, he has summoned demons from hell, and
nice.
so like. Canonical hell, canonical Satan in FF2. Let's fucking go. The Emperor of Palamecia has summoned demons from hell, and he's using those to take over the world, right? Like, and so he's started his campaign, and one of the towns in his campaign for world domination is the town of Fynn, and that's kind of where our story is beginning-ish. If you're watching one of the versions that have the cutscenes, you actually see some of the downfall of the town and castle of Fynn. And I think in the cutscenes, you actually see soldiers come in and take over and like attack like the princess and the king who managed to escape, right? So they storm the castle, they take over, they slaughter tons of the townspeople, and our story concerns 4 children, or they call them children, but I think they're supposed to be like in their like late teens or something like that. The main characters from Fynn, whose parents are killed by the Empire soldiers. And we once you select a new game on the Famicom, we immediately are in a battle representing them running away from the soldiers that are sacking Finn.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens in the Pixel remaster, where you see that cinematic where you kind of see all these things as the prologue's happening. I did notice that in the Pixel remaster, it doesn't say hell; it does say summon from a different from the
dimension.
Underworld, I think.
Okay.
I'm looking at the prologue, which is on the manual of just the first thing in the manual of Final Fantasy II Origins. And it's in a distant land, the peace long enjoyed by the people came to a crashing end. The Emperor of Palamacia summoned fiends from another dimension, and the Empire launched its campaign for world conquest. In response, a rebel force arose in the Kingdom of Finn. In the ensuing clash between Rebel and Empire, Castle Finn was taken. The rebels were forced to retreat to remote town of Altair. Amidst the chaos, 4Use also fled the occupied Finn. They were childhood friends, now orphaned and homeless. They suddenly found themselves running for their lives, and then, presumably, I'm guessing it kicks you into that first battle, that first cinematic
you just
battle.
are in the battle. Like, as soon
How'd you guys
as
do
started.
in that battle? I fucking kicked their ass.
You showed those soldiers what was up. They shouldn't have picked on these 4 orphans.
Yeah, there's little newsies up in here, but
so
it's cool. We're fighting. Is it Black Knights in the Famicom version? I'm sure it doesn't actually say Black Knights because there's not much character space, but
that's what they are. Yeah.
There's a bunch of big, scary horsemen.
4 big, scary horsemen, and they are towering over our characters, who canonically are named Firion, Maria, Guy, and Leon.
Interesting.
I love Leon.
And this might be a good time to talk about the names too.
I want to point out that's the same that they are in the Pixel remaster, but I'm looking at the manual, and again, I haven't actually booted up the like Dawn of Souls or whatever it was called on the Vita, but his name is Gus in the manual of.
Oh, really?
I think it's canonically supposed to be Guy or Guy. But
also known as Gus. Interesting.
Yeah, so in some translations, I guess it's Gus for whatever reason. But yeah, Firion, Gus, Maria, and Leon.
In the Final Fantasy II Famicom manual that I'm holding in my hands right now and paging through, there is not a characters page. It actually does not have a page to show the main characters. But the WonderSwan version does have a characters page. And Firion's name in that one is Frionel. Frionel. So interesting. Yeah.
Did you get an option to rename your characters, Curtis?
I did when I hit the new game. Yeah.
Nice. Did you rename your characters?
I did not. I named them normally because I was like, I'm going to be talking about these characters the entire time, and I don't want to forget. And then while we're talking, being like, oh yeah, and then Butt took this much damage, and then Fart, used teleport.
A Final Fantasy game with a character named Butt. How ridiculous. I thought the same exact thing, and I was like, Firion isn't really a name that is too recognizable, like Maria, Leon, Guy. That's fine. I can remember
for FF1. It makes more sense to do your own names because the characters really have no story.
Now, having said that, I did change their names anyway.
I think I know where Carl might be going, but
I'm sure you know where I'm going ultimately. I changed all of their names because fuck it, I don't care. I think I'm smart enough to be able to remember 2 names. Firion kind of had a Guy Fieri vibe to it, so okay. Of course.
Fieri.
What if I named him Guy?
So now his name. Yeah.
No. I named him Flavortown. Maria. I was trying to think of something clever. I couldn't really, and then I was like, you know what, Maria. I can remember it by doing Marzipan, like from Homestar Runner, the princess of that mythology. Although I guess Maria is not the princess. Anyway, Guy. I was thinking of Guy from Takeshi's Castle / Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. So I named him Ledouche. Right. Guy Ledouche is on my team. And then Leon, of course, if you've listened to this podcast at all, I named him Squall. Come on.
Yeah. I was going to say, so it's funny too, because obviously there was character limitations for the original Famicom versions. For older games, there's often more harsh character limitations. Interestingly, this game actually has quite a few letters. I think you can do like 6 or 7 letters per character, which is pretty nice. But in the manual, Leon's name is not Leon. It's Leon Hart, which is Squall's last name.
Yeah.
And also, he's the dark, brooding character of the game. And I was just like, it's just Squall.
It's literally just fucking
FF2
Squall,
had
dude.
Squall in it.
Surprise, motherfuckers, we're doing FF8 after all. Anyway, so the game opens up. We got to go to the fire cavern.
Well, it's like we were talking, like FF2, every game after FF2 is just FF2 again.
Yeah.
Like it's there, like this is the first Final Fantasy. FF2 is FF1. It's crazy. But yeah, I got absolutely ass blasted in this battle.
Yeah.
They do like 300 to 600 damage each, and we all only have like 20 HP.
Like 20 HP.
Yeah.
They did like 800 plus damage to Furion, and I was like, ooh.
See,
that's not
now
good.
The interesting thing is we already talked about how you can exploit this system. So this is literally the case of fucking keep punching me, I'll just grind harder. They just did exactly what we wanted them to, baby. They made us stronger.
A very interesting thing that I found out, I didn't read this anywhere. I personally found this out when I played Final Fantasy II. So I played the intro scene 3 times. Once, I just loaded up the ROM on my computer and I go, oh, it's in Japanese. I'm not going to be able to do this. So I went through the first battle and then dicked around in Japanese a little bit. Whatever, no big deal. So I loaded a different translation up and I played through that, but I wasn't happy with the translation. Like some of the ways they translated the proper nouns, I was like, even I know that's not what the katakana says. So let me do it again. So I did it a third time. On the third time, I got ambushed in the first encounter, so you can get like a back attack ambush on the initial encounter, and it's not a thing that happens every time because I played it multiple times through, and I was like, what? Yeah, you can get an ambush on number 1. That's crazy.
That's really funny.
So I was like, oh, if I was speedrunning this, I would try to figure out how to make the RNG do that, so that I don't have to put in commands.
I looked it up, and we need to suspend our disbelief here, maybe. Who knows how true this can be, but I found a thread from 2013 on Sega-16.com, and it's a video of someone who hacked their game and has Furion at like quad 9 health, like probably just maxed out. Doing the first battle, and it appears if you win the first battle, you get 10,500 gil, and then immediately kicked back to the new game screen. So you beat the game. That's the any percent, I guess. GG.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I guess they didn't code in there being any chance for you to win the fight, because it's an unwinnable fight unless you're
you can't even
Game Shark.
The way, like we were talking about the mechanics of the game, so here's another little calculations corner. Boop, back in we go.
You're gonna bring up the defense stat.
I'm gonna bring up the attack and evasion of enemies, because one of the roles that it does when it compares attack and defense is evasion. Will you actually hit the enemy? Because in this game, hits are a thing. When you attack, you don't just hit the enemy one time. You can hit them in between 1 and 16 times, and your damage is multiplied. And that is a factor of your proficiency with a weapon. These guys they're too strong. You can't even hit them. Like, you might be able to hit them once and do 1 HP, but that's an incredible roll, at least for the Famicom version. More than likely, it's just misses across the board. You're just not going to be able to get to their speed.
That ties into, I think there's like the defense stat where if an enemy has a higher defense stat than your attack stat, then you're not going to be able to damage them. You'll just hit them for 0. There is kind of a workaround with that, where if you get a critical hit, you can do some damage. But like Curtis said, in that instance, it would be a really good roll and you would get 1 HP. Right. I'm excited to talk about that a little more when we get deeper into the game, because that is a very funny thing that can happen. But we'll leave it there for now. So just an unwinnable fight that apparently if you win it just starts you over.
Annihilated.
Yeah.
We've had Final Fantasies with battles that you've had to have lost before, but usually it gives you like a couple turns of like to like settle in the dread of like, oh man, maybe this is an unwinnable battle. This one just smears you across the floor.
I think it's really cool that the developers of Final Fantasy are fans of our podcast and also time travelers. And when they heard us talking about Final Fantasy 1 and me going to the first boss encounter with no weapons weapons because I didn't realize that you had to buy weapons first, and assuming it was an unwinnable battle. I'm glad they gave me that nod in this game by programming in the first fight being in an unwinnable battle. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Gooch.
Thanks, Gooch. Yeah, so that we don't go to the game over screen. We get the defeated, but we don't get game over. And when we come to, we are just Furion by himself, right?
We're not even come to yet. We're at least
we are laying in an alchemy circle in my version of the game.
Oh, that's true. That's true. We're not even coming to yet. But it's just Furion by himself. The other party members are not there. But Furion is laying in like a sigil, a summoning circle or whatever, and he has two characters around him. One is like a princess, and the other one is like a white mage wearing a turban. I guess is a decent way to describe
the class
him.
is technically wizard. I think at least in my version of the game, upgrade from mage to wizard. He's the job promoted version. I don't really know if I want to call him a white wizard because I feel like that has a different connotation.
That will be really funny for any of our like foreign listeners who might not understand what that might be.
Yeah, so the etymology of white wizard in the United States can be traced back to the KKK, who fucking suck, and we hate those guys.
Yeah, that's right. What's the opposite of support? Hate? Critical hate.
Critical hate.
Unbased.
Unbased. But
one character is, at least in the Pixel remasters, it's I think it's Minwoo, but in some it's called Mindu.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Mindu. Yeah, I think Minwoo is like the canonical name. Like if you play like any of the mobile games or something like that have a lot of characters in them, they'll call him Minwoo.
But yeah, they're surrounding Furion.
And they're performing like healing magics on him, right? Like the princess or queen, we don't know what she is. Right? All we can determine is that she's like some form of royalty, probably. She says that as they were fleeing the town of Finn, they came across this kid, and he was barely alive, so they brought him with them, right? So wherever they've all fled to, they found us being defeated by those Dark Knights, picked us up and brought us with them. And so now they're performing healing magic on them. And the mage says, like, all right, I think I've done enough. Like, he has a life force left. I can detect that he's still alive. He should be okay. We just need to leave him here on this.
We'll let him rest. We sense a strong life force in him. It should also be noted, at least in my version, we do get the name of this princess that's here. Her name is Hilda.
Hilda, yeah.
Which is interesting. I was trying to find the etymology of why they called her Hilda, because my brain immediately just kind of went to Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which has the aunts that are Hilda and Zelda. And I'm
oh, okay.
I guess Archie Comics might predate this, so maybe it's a nod to that. There's also...
Or Brimhilda.
Yeah. I think the etymology on the fandom is just that Hild in German means battle, I think, which... Who knows? But
do you think they named her after the queen in FF9?
Maybe, perhaps. She has
a cool headdress that looks very Norse. Also, so I was thinking Brunhilde.
I was thinking it'd be funny if the developers made it Princess Hilda because of Nintendo's very famous Princess Zelda, and Zelda and Hilda is the established thing in Sabrina, which I think is why Nintendo in A Link Between Worlds also had Princess Hilda. But
oh my gosh,
this is a conjecture from me, but.
Well, I'm excited for our next episode when we have the director of Sabrina the Teenage Witch as a guest. No.
Hell yes.
How do we get them?
Melissa Joan Hart coming at us this season. Let's go.
So that's what Minwoo says. He's like, we can leave this kid here. They'll be all right. And Hilda says, it's just as well. We have things to do. The Empire is finishing the Dreadnought. Mm-hmm. And so once they've finished this thing that they're building, their attack is going to begin for real. Like the thing that they just did for Finn, that was just the pre-show. That was the pre-game. Once they've finished the Dreadnought, then we're screwed. So we need to get.
I was going to say Metal Gear as well.
Once they finish Metal Gear, I mean, I guess that's kind of like the nature of it. Is like the Palamasian Empire is building their Metal Gear, and Hilda says like, we need to get to it. We got to figure out what our plan is, because once they get to that point, we're screwed. And they leave the room.
There's also mention of Bafsk, I think is how
they said is the Dreadnought of Bafsk. Is that what?
Yeah, they're building it in Bafsk.
Okay,
in Bafsk.
Bad Bafsk and beyond.
Yeah, Bafsk. What kind of town there?
That's a weird name.
But they leave the room, and either right then immediately Furion comes to, or we have to suspend our disbelief and believe later. Furion actually like wakes up.
I like to think it's immediately.
Yeah, he just hears the door closing and is like, whoa!
He's been pretending to be like asleep the whole time.
He's been getting that free healing. That's right. But yeah, he wakes up and he realizes that Maria, Guy, and Leon are not with him, and he calls out for them.
Right.
And leaves the room. Right, he walks out of the room, and once he walks out of the room, Guy and Maria are here. Like, they're like, oh my gosh, Furion, we feared the worst about you. Like, we weren't sure if you were going to make it. And he's like, oh my gosh, glad to see you all. Where's Leon? And depending on the version of the game that you have, they'll either say like, oh, Leon's not here. Or Maria will very specifically say, my brother isn't with us. And so we learn that Leon is Maria's brother.
In mine, Guy, he's kind of written to be kind of like a Hulk. Right?
Guy does caveman speak. It's great.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about
Finn
that.
Princess, save us. Leon not here.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. I was like, is this just like translation issues or?
If I may delve into Final Fantasy II.
I don't want to say he's dumb. I don't know enough about him yet, but he just talks like the Hulk.
if I may take a moment to dive into a little Final Fantasy II Labyrinth of Darkness novelization written by Terada.
Please.
Guy was raised by beasts.
Nice, dude. Hell yeah.
Is he like the Kamari of this one?
He's a human
Triple that
raised.
and you got me.
He was a human raised by beasts, and so he speaks human tongue very caveman like, but he also speaks to animals. So
I think I did read in the manual. That was like a detail that I'm like, I guess that comes up later, but I didn't see it yet. So I kind of like, anytime I see like a potential spoiler, I kind of just like eject it from my mind, and I know my memory sucks enough that like I can just like sort of forget stuff. So I saw that in the manual and I was like, well, that's weird. He possesses enormous discipline and physical strength. Despite appearances, he is very gentle and occasionally naive. He is also capable of communicating with animals. I was like, well, what the fuck?
Yep.
So no mention of the caveman speak or the being raised by animals, but hey.
A fun thing you can do with this game, too, by the way, is that because everybody's stats start so low, because there's no levels, you're essentially level 1, but different characters are kind of built out to be different things. Maria makes a very good like archer or a black mage. Furion's good with a sword. Guy's good with an axe. They start a little bit toward this or toward that, but you don't have to go that way if you don't want to. Like,
expert sphere grid, baby.
If you want to get like goofy with it, if you want to get a little nutty, you can just spend like a little bit more time. It probably take an hour or so or whatever, but like you could spend some time making like Maria your axe wielder if you want. You can do it.
My older cousin actually told me that if you focus all of your magic on Gus, he starts talking like a smart guy. If you raise his intelligence stat up high enough, then he starts speaking smart. And his dad actually works at Nintendo, so.
Yeah, if you raise Guy's intelligence all the way up, you can do a speech check with the final boss of Fallout New Vegas, and you don't actually even have to fight him. You just get to go right there.
I do want to point this out too. I haven't experienced this in my like 6 hours of playing this game so far, or if I did, I didn't notice it. But in the manual, it does say when certain attributes increase, others may decrease. For example, intelligence decreases when strength increases. Endurance decreases when intelligence increases, and strength decreases when spirit increases.
So there is less. There are dice rolls for them, and there's less of a chance, like a less of a dice roll chance, that your stats will decrease than increase. So over time, if you were like keep going, you'll be fine. Like if you need to like, if your magic or whatever is decreased to a certain point, and you're like, oh, I need to build it back up, you could do that. But it's not really worth it. It's not worth to try to build even characters.
I think another important thing that just reminded me of, we talked about the change from like the way spells worked in Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 2 and the MP system. Now anyone can learn any spell, and you have up to 16 that you can learn, and you can also forget them. But the downside of that is if you forget a spell that you've reached a higher proficiency level in, you forget that proficiency entirely, and you have to start from the ground up.
My recommendation is to make a character white mage, make a character black mage. Don't mix the types up, and just go with that so that you can have all that type of magic on one character. It is my recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, especially like when you that's your way of having a little more granularity to create your own build like you could in Final Fantasy 1. It's just kind of an evolution of that.
Right. Also, you don't get checks to level up like magic power outside of battle, but you do get proficiency for your spells outside of battle. So your white mage, I make Fury on the white mage when I play this game. If I don't want to risk Furion losing like attack proficiency, I can just cure in the menu, and I'll still get curing proficiency without the risk of lowering my strength.
Yeah, nice.
So, except you won't get any more MP that way, so it's a trade-off.
Right. I figured out a thing similar to that, where when I got out of like one of the first dungeons that you go in, I was like, oh, I can use the teleport spell. So I used that, and then I noticed, at least in the version that I'm playing, the Pixel Remaster, they have like a little bar that almost looks like an ATB bar from other Final Fantasy games that shows you the progress, like the level up proficiency progress. And every time I use teleport, it would increase a little bit. So I was like, I could just sit here and grind this all day. Would it be worth it? Probably not. Like the teleport.
I was gonna say, did you notice anything else interesting about teleport in this game?
Oh yeah, it I think it even says it if you read the description in game.
It does.
Where it says like at the risk of your own health or something. Like it will sacrifice your HP. And I think like the lore significance of that is you're teleporting to another dimension to like leave out. So it's kind of like in X-Men Evolution when Nightcrawler's teleportation powers were explained and he was able to slow it down, and then he was going into some fucked up weird dimension that he got stuck in. That was pretty cool.
This is a Nightcrawler spell.
But yeah, I leveled up to like teleport level 2, and I think the way it works in battle is you can teleport an enemy into another dimension, which basically just, I guess it's kind of like a one-shot kill. I don't know how that affects the like loot that you get at the end of the game or end of the battle or whatever. But
oh, you mean X Zone from FF6? I understand.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So we see our characters. They're, with the exception of Leon, we're all back together, right? We have Maria and Guy with us, and they automatically walk into the princess's chamber, and they start a dialogue with her, and we don't actually even have control yet. This all just begins, right? And our party is like, hey, obviously we're orphans from Finn. We have nowhere to go. We don't have parents anymore. The Empire killed our parents. And the only thing we want is just to be able to join your rebellion now and just fight back against the Empire. And Hilda's like, you're too young. Like, don't throw your lives away. If you like, I appreciate it. We do need to fight against the Empire. But if you join, they'll just kill you. It'll be a waste. Like, don't do that. I don't remember what she says next. I'm going entirely off memory. Would anybody like to take it from me?
Yeah, it's like, nonsense, you only waste your lives in the war. You must go home at once. And Maria's like, but your highness, we no longer have homes, and our parents, they're... Oh, I'm very sorry for your loss. You're welcome to stay in Altair.
That's right.
Yeah.
You only need to know our secret code to live here, and that's...
Wild Rose.
Wild Rose.
Does it show up in text, or it's like...
I think it shows up in, like...
It...
Yeah, it has like a different color. She says the password is Wild Rose. Remember it well. And in my version, it's red. And then you can go into the menu because a little menu pops up where you can have ask, learn, key items, and exit. Key items, there's nothing there. We don't have any yet.
So you select learn, and then it like highlights.
Well, you select ask, I think, and
you select
you can
learn
get some additional dialogue
word.
about that, about why it's like the Wild Rose is. Its importance to the society here, and why is the password.
The Wild Rose is Finn's crest, strong and beautiful as she once was. But how? Oh, what will become of Finn?
Yeah.
I hear captains are being gathered at Finn. Speaking of which, Maria's brother has been reported missing. Perhaps he's being held in Finn. Monsters prowl the city now, so even approaching it is dangerous.
Yeah,
and
so...
And with learn, then we get this new mechanic of having a word that we can then go and speak to other people to gather information from them.
Right.
In this case, this is a password, so it's going to be helpful to find some other, rebel homies and say like, hey, Wild Rose. And then they're like, oh shit, yeah, check this shit out.
I do enjoy that even in the original version, the ask learn items doesn't pop up with every NPC. It just pops up with the NPCs that have something to be asked or learned from them.
That's a really good quality of life thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that I don't have to talk to every single person in town and be like, Wild Rose, and then see if they say anything. It'll only pop up when there's
Where are the sailors?
Yeah, right.
Now, that's not to say that there are some that get that text box. And when you try and talk to them, they'll just say question mark. Like they might not have anything programmed for that, but it's not every single NPC. Like a lot of the NPCs, even in the remake, will say the same thing. Like I walked into a bar in one of the towns and like every single person in there said the exact same thing, even the bartender. And I was like, that's extremely silly.
Yeah. So we learn Wild Rose from Hilda. She tells us we can just stay in Altair. And like you said, Alex, there are people who mention that, Leon might be being held captive in Fynn. Yeah. So I think that kind of sets us toward going back to the town of Fynn to see what's become of it. But there are like other people and things to do in the town. We're currently in like the rebel hideout. There's like an underground base where they are, or not underground. I guess it's in a building.
It's literally just one of the 4 buildings that has a door in this town. That's not an inn or whatever.
The king is also here, and he's been injured though. He's been like grievously injured. His guards that are like guarding his door are like, yo, he's been hit bad, and we don't even know if he's gonna get better. Like it's that kind of bad injury.
Yeah.
And if you talk to him, he says that's why Hilda, my daughter, has been put in charge. Like for now, she's leading everything. If you need anything, go talk to her. So the king does live. The king of Fynn does live, but just barely at the moment.
If you call that living.
If you call that living.
But yeah, you can kind of go around and talk to different NPCs. It's kind of a tutorial area. If you go back to the room with the sigil, there's actually very reminiscent of getting the canoe, I think it was, in Final Fantasy 1. There's just like a bunch of wizards that are kind of chilling there.
Oh, they're not in the original one.
Oh, really? Interesting.
No. Yeah, they're kind of the tutorial when if you want to learn about a certain mechanic, they'll just like talk to you about it.
They explain everything to you about how the systems work, which is pretty interesting.
Okay, cool.
So they'll be like, punch yourself in the face to gain strength. They don't say that. they speak it very much in the terms of how this
my finger.
There's one NPC that you can talk to, and he says like, there's a port town called Paloom, which I was like, ooh, Palom, interesting.
Yeah.
And he says, but like a lake stands between us, and the only way to get there is by canoe, which has a different color as well. It's like a green color, so it's like, I guess we'll get a canoe eventually. Just a lot of foreshadowing for future areas and future mechanics.
My favorite interaction in this entire town is if you go to the weapons store, there's an old man in the corner, and if you talk to him, he's just like, I'm just a crazy old man, nothing to see here. And then if you ask him Wild Rose, he says, or am I? Maybe I'm Tobal the blacksmith.
Perhaps I am the best blacksmith in the land.
Or am I?
It's really good.
Wild Rose.
It's a really cute system.
Yeah, I agree. There's also 2 important characters here. One is Paul the ninja, or Paul the thief.
Yeah,
there's just a guy walking around in ninja outfit, and if you talk to him, he's like, I'm Paul, the greatest thief of all time. And if you say Wild Rose to him, he's like, oh, don't worry, I don't steal from the rebels. I am a pro-rebel thief, only stealing from the Empire. So
I think his name is Pavel in some versions.
I am a gentleman thief.
Yeah, so love that guy.
Lupin the Third here.
Yeah, I'm Pavel, the thief of all thieves. I've been making tons by stealing from the Empire's vault.
His dialogue in the Pixel Remaster is really funny. He says, I'm Paul, greatest thief in all the world. They've yet to invent the loot I can't burgle or steal.
That's a good bit.
That's really good.
There's also a character who's walking around named Gordon that you can talk to. And Gordon is part of the royalty from Fynn, right? Or He's from another country, though, isn't he? He's
Kashan, I think.
Yes, he is the Prince
probably
of
has
Kashan.
different pronunciations. This very much so reads as like katakana translated to be like phonetic, Kashan. I'm seeing another translation here that's Cassion.
Okay.
So it's like, I know that Shion, when I was watching the show called Terrace House, they had a guy on it whose name was Shion, because it's a Japanese show. But then when I was like looking him up online, he was like half American on the show, and he was literally just named Sean. So the translation for the Japanese is that he's Shion, but his name is literally Sean.
Yeah, so I just looked it up. So Gordon is the Prince of Kashan, along with his brother Scott, but they are allies of Finn. So they were in Finn when the Empire struck, and he's like moping around, and he's having like a bit of a crisis. Where he's like, I ran away, but my brother was captured. I'm too cowardly to go do anything about it because like the Empire is so strong. If I go out there, I'm just going to die. And so like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't go out there. I'll just be killed, and I'm too terrified to do it. And he's even like in the translation I'm playing, he's regretful of his actions to the point where he says, even if I ask Hilda for her to let me help, I'm too ashamed. Like, she's not going to even let me do it because I've been a coward. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But we also learned that Prince Scott is still in Finn because of that. So we have 2 leads to go to Finn now. We have possibly Leon is there, and possibly Prince Scott is still there.
Yeah.
Scotty knows.
That's right.
So we have a lead.
We have a lead.
We can buy some weapons if we want. We can buy some magic if we want. We can play around with those systems, but
get your leather hats like you always do, because no one is wearing a helmet in this game.
Teachers, grab your spell bags.
As I say, it's good for anybody who might forget to purchase equipment before the first boss. We do come with equipment this time. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a lot of different types, by the way. I don't know if y'all looked at the stat screens or anything like that. There are a ton of different kinds of weapons. Like, you can really customize your characters.
Even to the point where you can raise proficiency in just handheld. Like, you have like a fist stat that you can
you can just unequip and go with fist.
It's interesting too. I don't think we touched on it too much with like the equipment side of the mechanics, but you have things that you can equip in your right hand and your left hand, as well as, head, body, and arms for the armor. Left hand, you could put a shield there that has its own benefits, but it will cut down your attack a little bit if you have a shield, because you're only one-handing it. If you have just left hand empty and like a broadsword, that will have it at a higher attack stat because you're two-handing it. Is what the game's telling. Or you can dual wield. You can fucking power stance in this game by equipping 2 swords if you want to. But there's a takeaway or benefit from each. So it seems like a fun thing to kind of play around with. I've been doing it pretty straight so far. Like, I equipped Maria with a bow, and that's been working out pretty good.
I doubt this game has an unarmed stat, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There is? Or?
I don't know if it's this way in every version. Some versions of FF2, if you equip a shield, you do less damage with your swing. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you have a shield, which is good because that ups your evasion big time and your defense. But you technically are stronger going without a shield and just one-handing a weapon even, and then you can
technically it's implying probably that you're using 2 hands with one
exactly
weapon, right?
I think it explicitly says that somewhere. I think it might be one of those like wizards that you can talk to in the sigil room about two-handing, or it might have said it in like a manual somewhere. But
which I will say, like, evasion is pretty good for you and the enemies in this game. Like, at least in the Famicom version, I miss all the time. Like, I'm always missing. And if I have a shield, I evade like 1 out of every 2 like attacks. It's crazy. Like, the shields are pretty good, but you do have to contest with that trade-off.
I think it's pretty cool how they like worked these things in. I read somewhere that you can also change equipment mid battle, which I think is a thing that also existed in Final Fantasy 1, at least the version that I played. I think you could like take off the staff that could also be used as an item or something like mid battle. I haven't played around with that really, but it could be that if you're like, oh, I'm not doing enough damage and I don't care if I get hit a little more, you can take off the shield to two-hand the sword mid battle, which is pretty cool.
Sure.
Another little thing that I forgot about, but I'm seeing here in the script. I love how Tabul, the blacksmith, who's like, oh, nothing to see here. I'm just an old man, until like he gains your trust. If you talk to like a little boy that's just walking around town, he's like, oh yeah, Tabul, the blacksmith, like the smith in the armor shop. The smith in the armor shop can work wonders with his tools.
I'm looking at my notes here for the town to see if there's any other information. The only other information that I think that we get in the town is that I think one of Hilda's guards says it, if I'm not mistaken. It could be Gordon that says it. But somebody mentions there is General Borgen, who is a general of Finn. And the reason that Finn fell first and so quickly is that General Borgen has switched sides. He realized that the Empire is building the Dreadnought. He realized that they have some enemies from hell. And so he sold us out. That's why the Empire was able to take Finn so easily. So General Borgen, who was on Finn's side, is now working for the Empire.
Motherfucker.
A real
asshole energy. It reminds me of who's the guy in FF4? You know, the guy in FF4 from the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I forget.
Begins with a B. I don't know. Whatever. You know that guy.
Boshin.
Is it Borgen?
God damn it! Now I need to look it up.
I know. What's his name?
Is it Golbez? No, Golbez is always bad, right?
People are screaming at their podcast right now. They're being like, "Oh, it's this guy. This is his name, Bigen." Oh yeah, Joe fucking Bigen. That's right. Joe Bigen. That's right. Yeah. There are people who are freaking out right now, just being like,
Baron
"You
Bigen.
fucking idiots."
Borgen.
Well, I was wondering because he's a traitorous general. Borgen, Bigen, very similar. Every game is FF2. So.
Yeah, makes sense.
Beetleborgans.
But that's all I got to say about that. We have
Count Borgen.
Good leads, good reasons to go to Finn. And even though Hilda doesn't want us to meddle around with the Empire, we may have to do a little meddling.
Yeah.
I love to be a little devious.
Or if you prefer, you can have the ending where you just turn off the game and you live a happy life in Altier or whatever it's called.
That's right. Yeah.
I, for one, welcome the Empire. I think they're doing good things.
If you listen closely to what Borgen has to say, he actually has some really good points that I don't think people are really necessarily ready to hear. You learn a key word. You can learn a key word in this from Borgen that's just Q, and you can go around and talk to every NPC about Q.
Okay, and on that note,
and learn about the deep state.
On that note, I think that's good for episode 1 of Final Fantasy 2.
Yeah, the Every FNFF podcast where we go one, we go all.
I'll see y'all next week.
Parody, fuck QAnon, parody. Alex, do you want to throw us in a sigil and bring our fucking ass-kicked asses back to life?
No, I'm just going to leave you. Just wallow on your sigil. Thank you all for listening. I don't say that enough, but thank you. But also thank you to Night of the Round returning this season for the theme music. They went all out and this time and actually re-recorded an old, something from their old records.
That rules.
So this is a exclusive podcast recording version for us, and it's super nice of them to do that. Thank you to Nobuo Uematsu for the said music. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. You can find us at EveryFNFF on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can reach us at 530 Materia. And hop in our Discord. And Wild Rose. That's all I have to say about that.
All right. See y'all next week.
Bye.
See ya.